Okay, today we're going to talk about clay. Most of the time I'll give you a hunk of clay like this and I'll tell you to wedge it. So if I tell you to wedge it, this is how you're going to do that. It's kind of like kneading bread, if you've ever made bread. So you're going to push down with the heel of your hand like this and then turn it over on itself, okay? And then you kind of spin it and push down. You can either use one hand or two hands depending on how big the hunk of clay is. And the purpose of this is to get all the air bubbles out of the clay, okay? If there are any air bubbles left in the clay, it will explode when it goes through the kiln, okay, to be fired. So I've had that happen to a kid's piece, and it's really sad when it does happen. So the better you wedge it, the less chance you have of your piece exploding, okay? And you're gonna do this for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes until you feel like all the air bubbles are out and it's really kind of starting to come together as a ball, okay? If it sticks to the table, you can just use the clay itself to get it off the table and then pat it into a ball, okay? Like I said, 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, longer than what I just did. This has already been wedged once before, so. Okay, so we're gonna be making 2 types of stamps. And the first stamp that we're gonna make will be made out of wet clay, just like this. And it's gonna be a fairly simple stamp, just to get you kind of familiar with the feeling of the clay. The second stamp that we make is going to be a little bit more complicated. You're gonna be creating a symbol. You're gonna let the clay dry slightly and then actually carve out of it. So let's take a look at the first type that you're gonna be making today. So most of the time when we work, you wanna work on a red rag instead of right on the surface of the table, because the clay sticks to the table but it doesn't stick to the rag. So if you're ever rolling out a slab or doing anything like that, you want to be working on the red rag, okay? You won't really need the rag today because most of what we're doing you're going to do with your hand. Okay, so I'm going to give you this tiny hunk of clay, and you do want to wedge it a little bit. You can actually do this small amount with your thumbs. Okay, just trying to get all the air out. Push, push, push. And if it sticks to the table, just get it off. And then kind of squeeze it into a ball with your hands, okay? You can use the surface of the table to roll it into a better ball too. So once you have a ball, you're gonna just kind of start squeezing one edge of the ball. And notice I'm using my right hand. I'm right-handed, so I'm using my right hand to squeeze one edge of it, and I'm pushing against my palm on the other hand. And you're trying to make a kind of a mushroom shape. Okay, so see how I'm getting a little stem of the mushroom there? And that's gonna be the handle for your stamp, okay? And so you want to end up kind of with this kind of shape. Looks like a little mushroom. And you can pat it against the table to make sure the bottom is nice and flat. Smooth it out with your fingers. You can also take a rib tool. These are rib tools. There are 3 different kinds: plastic, metal, and wood. And you can smooth out the bottom with that rib tool. Okay. So that's looking pretty smooth and pretty flat. And then I'm just going to push down into the bottom with different items and make a design, okay? So, for example, I'll start with this circle. This is just the lid of a glue stick, okay? Start with the circle, and then I want maybe some shapes like this. You can do whatever you want for this, okay? We're really just experimenting. And if at any point you don't really like what's happening, you can crumple your clay back up into a ball and try again. Okay, put a few more of these shapes on this side maybe. I'm just making this up as I go along. So there is my stamp, okay? I also want to take a needle tool, this sharp tool is the needle tool, and I'm going to write my name on the handle, okay? Don't push too hard, it will go through your handle really easily. I'm just barely touching it to the handle. Write my name, and please, let's write first name, last initial, okay? Because even if there's only one of you in the class, I might have another of you in another class, and all these things get mixed together in the kiln when they go to be fired. So first name, last initial written on your handle with a needle tool, and then you're gonna set it aside to dry, okay? If for some reason you didn't quite finish, if you don't quite finish your piece, and you don't want it to dry out overnight because you want to keep working on it next class, you're going to put it into a plastic bag, okay, because the air is going to dry out your clay so it's not usable anymore. Stick it in the plastic bag, and then you have to really wrap it up. You can ask me for a rubber band if you want, or you can kind of just set your piece on top of the bag so that it's not going to open up, okay? But this stamp I actually want to dry out overnight, so I'm just going to leave it to dry. And let me show you real quick. Next time when you come in, you can try out your stamp that you made. And I have some clay stamps here. These are just made out of wood. They're not made of clay. But it's really a cool effect, and it puts some nice texture into your pieces. So after we make our stamps, we're going to be using our stamps to create texture on some pieces that we make. So that's why we're making the stamps first. Pretty cool, huh? So once you're all done making your stamp, you need to clean up. And clean up with clay is super important because I have a class coming in right after your class, and they want a clean space to work. So I have all this clay dust on my table, and as you know, with clay, you want to only clean up with wet surfaces. So I wouldn't want to brush this off onto the floor with a brush or with my hand or with a dry rag, because the clay dust is dangerous for our lungs to breathe, okay? So my sponge is damp. It's not sopping wet. I have wet it and then wrung it out over at the sink. And I am going to wipe this surface one time. Okay, and then, so you can see the clay dust here. I'm gonna flip my sponge over to the clean side, and I'm gonna wipe it a second time. And if you have a lot of clay on your table, then you probably need to head back to the sink, rinse out the rag again, or rinse out the sponge again, and come back and actually do it again. So you're doing it 3 or 4 times. And then you're gonna grab a dry towel over at the sink and just dry the table off, because I have a class coming in a few minutes and they want a dry surface to work. So just make sure it's totally dry. And then that's how your table should look when it's time to go. And this is what I'm looking for in order to dismiss your table. Okay?